So Kevin,
Ted,
one of the things I've gotten increasingly interested with is how creative people are making their way in the world, given the realities of the world today.
Mm-hmm.
And a number of freelancers is increasing dramatically. Corporations are retaining people less on salaries and in full-time positions, and so there's more and more freelancers in the world. And in fact, one of the studies I read predicted that the U.S. workforce will be half freelance in a couple of years, which is pretty amazing. And those of us who have creative traits like you do and like I do, we have to find other ways of making our way in the world, not being so dependent on a full-time gig from a single organization.
Let me throw this in too, and tell me if this is what you see out there in the world. Creatives can be a little off on one end of the continuum of weirdness, shall we say. And that's what I encountered in the few times that I have worked for a company and had a job and was an employee. I always got this uneasy feeling like it was about over, like I was going to get canned. Why? I don't know. You know, I'm a friendly guy. A lot of people like me, but somehow the whole cubicle world and me, you know, I can sort of fake it, but I think the people who I have to answer to are much more structured. They don't quite get the creative. So if you're answering directly to somebody who's not a buffer between the creative world and the administrative world, that could be a little weird, right?
I think you're totally correct.
Okay.
That's the case. And to survive in the corporate world, you need to fit certain circumstances and certain behaviors. And so often we're not so good at that.
Yeah.
Or maybe we don't want to, or whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, in my experience, creatives are far more motivated by the work itself than anything else. More motivated by the work than the money.
All right, we want to do cool stuff.
Yeah, we want to do cool stuff, and secondarily, so first the work, and then in my experience, the second thing we're motivated by is other creatives working in a group with creatives and sharing stuff back and forth with others who respect us, and we in turn respect them for their skills.
Yeah, and if that environment can be stripped away mostly of competitive motives, all the better.
Right. Yeah,
I've been working in this songwriting world lately.
Right.
And it's a thing to co-write with other people. And it can, a beginner in that might think, well, I hope I have the best idea. Now here, listen to this idea. Everybody will be so impressed. Hey, I thought of that idea, so that song's mostly mine, right? When it becomes a hit, and then who gets the money? Well, the rule to eliminate that, the rule amongst songwriters, at least in the Nashville world where that's what I'm familiar with, is if you're in the room, you're in the right. And you could be sitting there having a bad day and grunt a few times, and you'll still get your 1/3 shared credit if there's 3 people.
Wow. Yeah.
And the thinking there is that the thing you bring influences what the other people do also. So what I've noticed about the Nashville world, at least the part of it I've brushed into, is everybody's kind of for everybody, trying to lift the other guy up, figuring, you know, if somebody else has some success and recognition, they will come back and say, hey, I'm going to be playing at the such and so. It's kind of a big gig for me. Can you join the band for that? Sure. And now suddenly, you know, everybody lifts.
Right. Yeah, well, I love hearing that, and it makes total sense to me, because in the design world, which is most of my history, that's also true. And the best work and the best organizations are small groups where everybody respects everybody else in the group. So if you don't kind of measure up, you don't get in the group in the first place. So measure up to whatever that group, you know, the standards of that group are. But once you're in, then there's this collaboration that goes back and forth, and you're all focused on the purpose of the work. And in fact, critiques against, using a creative brief as something to critique against, makes it possible for everyone to contribute, and then for our work to be individually critiqued against the brief, and we're all trying to tell the same story in one way or another. So we're together in this, and the critique is focusing on the work, not focused on the individual. And that way you reinforce the needs that the group has, as individuals have, to be in the group and be respected and so on. So
another element I don't know if it's just unique to me, is what I'll call audience applause. And so imagine a theater where the curtain is closed and everybody's worked hard and they're set and ready. The curtain opens, the orchestra starts, and there's that thing that when I present some new piece of work, I want the audience to be going, "Whoa, that is really cool." and that actually drew me to environmental graphics, branding and signs and things inside of buildings and outdoor areas. I did a fair amount of that, and partially it's because it's so seen. Everybody sees it. I love that. So I wonder, what I call the audience applause, it's a factor for me.
Oh, well, I think that's, I think it goes without saying.
Okay, good. I'm not weird.
No, I think it goes without saying that we really are desperate for that kind of feedback,
Affirmation.
Affirmation, you bet. I mean, a colleague of mine said to me the other day, "And I really like your drawings." And I was like, my little heart just went pitter-pat because my website's full of my drawings.
Yeah, like you have them up, hanging up in the
photos of me and all that
amazing.
stuff. So it's.
I like them too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I worked for that. Yeah. But in this little conversation, one of the points I want to make is that your story is a story of transitioning through many different creative activities over the course of your career.
Okay.
And I believe that is a way that more and more creatives will be able to be successful in their lives and support themselves within this world that we live in, is by recognizing that they will be able to experience doing many different kinds of creative activities. And I made a little list here, and Kevin and I did a little preview conversation a few days ago, and from my list and my memory of our conversation, Kevin started professionally as an elementary school teacher with fourth graders.
True.
Which is really cool.
It's fun.
Fourth grade was, by the way, extremely important to me personally. I don't know if we'll get into that. But
is that where somebody recognized that you can draw?
Well, no, I flunked the fourth grade.
Well, part of it. There may have been other parts you sailed at.
Yeah.
It just didn't appear on the report card. Good with women.
Well, that's always been a goal as well. And then you moved. Then you moved into graphic design, and because you didn't kind of realize that there were writers who wrote things for graphic designers, you became a writer too.
Right.
And you wrote your own stuff. And then, of course, you got
photography. Same deal.
You got into photography, not knowing that there were all these photographers out there with all these skills, so you learned it yourself. And then you got into retailing with the dancing brush experiment and experience, and you're still doing that, running a retail store.
Paint your own pottery studio.
Paint your own patio studio. And then you're a musician.
Yeah.
And
love that.
And then you're a recording engineer.
Love that.
And you're a songwriter within these collaborative environments. And of course you're a storyteller and explainer, and I'd forgotten about the environmental graphics. I remember that now. You did that very successfully as well. So, and I think that is actually the future for many of us creative, not everybody, but for some of us may dig into something and just focus on it. But others of us will need to have many different things that we do. And in fact, I've transitioned personally from being focused on design to now I do more writing than I do designing. So there you go.
I wonder if the common thread between all those is that you need to capture people's attention or emotion or just create some kind of a curtain opening experience.
Yes.
So.
Well, I think your elementary school teaching experience, holding the attention of 8 and 9-year-olds is not easy to do. And my guess is that you had some natural talent for that to begin with, you liked them,
Mm-hmm.
and you found ways of capturing them in a way so that they would respond to you and sit in their seats when they needed to, and
They needed to.
for the most part,
Yeah.
and do other stuff when they needed
Have them
to.
doing stuff worth sitting for.
Have them do stuff that they're excited about, because that's the other thing about us human beings, is that we love to work hard when we're interested in it.
Exactly.
So we have to be interested in it to do it. So my guess is that your elementary school work actually prepared you for your graphic design career.
Oh, totally. Because elementary school teachers have to do everything. They don't have an office staff or an administrative assistant to run copies or
Right.
whatever. In fact, that's something that was a struggle for a while for me. I would go and, as I started to get better design jobs, I was working with more like VPs instead of managers of VPs.
Right.
And I found out a lot of them can't actually do anything. It's really weird. They're getting paid a lot of money, and everything has to be spoon-fed to them, which was weird because I had to just do it.
Yeah.
And as a result, I was pretty good at getting stuff done. Yeah.
Yeah. So you also are very interested in learning new things. So you're when you and sometimes you're forced to. So you took over Dancing Brush and it was struggling, and you learned, and you said to me, there I was, most of the original staff had left. I'm standing at the cash register with customers wanting to spend money. I don't know how to operate a cash register.
It was horrible.
I could totally picture myself in that situation.
Yeah. Well, different people rallied around and helped out. And in short order, we got that covered.
Somebody saved you.
Yeah.
Somebody who was cared enough about what was going on to kind of make it happen in the moment, and you were spared somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. For people who don't know what that world is, the paint your own pottery world can be awesome, or it can be kind of a disaster. Imagine you paint a coffee mug and you put your heart into it, and you leave it with the store. They fire it in their kiln. Well, what if you come back to pick it up and it's not ready, or you come back to pick it up and they've broken it, or worse yet, they can't find it?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Yeah.
And so we had to, I had to create a system and a procedure for just about everything to make them more efficient, and guarantee zero mistakes. I mean, we'll do 10, 15,000 pieces a year, and we cannot lose one of them. And if we do have a problem, it's usually that something got broken, and we have procedures for how we handle that, and all that stuff. So that I ended up finding out I'm pretty good at.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the cash registers. I don't know if I'll ever get good at that.
Fortunately, somebody else can be good at it.
Right. We've got a great team there.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then tell me about how you pursued your musical career. You went to Nashville? I remember something about that. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I've always been, like a lot of kids in the 60s and 70s, you had the opportunity to be in the school band. So I was that because why? Well, it's kind of fun. You get out of class and go to band. And then in junior high and high school, it was actually something you could have as an elective, and it was just fun. I was never that serious about it during high school. Bass guitar is the first thing I landed on that was more of a rock and roll instrument, and that was because our school had a jazz band. I had sort of blown it off. I'd heard announcements about it, but didn't care that much. Well, I walked into the band room after school one day, and they're rehearsing. This is the jazz band. There's a drum set. Oh my gosh, look at that. And then there's Karen Harkins who's playing the bass, and she's a straight A student flute player. They never get in trouble. Everything's perfect in their life. She would probably laugh if she heard me say that. But my thing is, wait a second. Karen should not be doing something that cool. So that kind of lit a fire in me. I'm going to learn how to do that. Talked to the band teacher. He persuaded him to let us both play bass. Can you imagine that? A junior high band with two bass players is a rumble fest of mistakes. Bless his heart. So when we got to high school, we had to audition, and I beat her, so I felt great about that.
Yeah.
So I had some success early on.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what kept me through it is just interesting in that. And then when I was in college, I just fell in love with the sound of records. Just sitting there between two speakers kind of close and listening to this and listening to that. I was like, oh, that's so cool. Mm-hmm. So that perpetuated a fascination, like, how do you make stuff sound cool? Mm-hmm. So it's really just been a passion.
Yeah.
And after a while, you can get good enough at it that somebody else who isn't as good at it but wants their song created, they'll pay a little bit of money for that help.
And tell me about the Nashville experience.
I went there for a songwriting camp, just kind of wondering what's that like. And when I went there, I ended up going and watching this open mic, and there was a drummer there, and I was getting more focused on drums myself. So I chatted with him afterwards, and I said, hey, do you ever play drums on somebody's project if I sent it to you and you record it, send tracks back over the internet? Mm-hmm. And he goes, oh yeah, every day. That's what I do. I'm a session player. And I go, really? Oh, awesome. Uh-huh. And I just figured, session player is like a god, and it's so expensive. I said, well, what would it cost? I was figuring he'd say $500 or something. Because up in Seattle, it seemed like everybody that I tried to talk to play on things, they were all in the hundreds of dollars range. Mm-hmm. He goes, $50. I said, really? I could do that. So I started doing that. I'd make the songs but leave out drums and send it to him and come back with awesome drums. Wow. And the thing is, and then through him I met a fiddle player who's and he's like world class. In fact, now he is in the house band at the Grand Ole Opry, which is a big deal for a fiddle player. Yeah. And he plays banjo and everything. Introduced to him, I said, hey, well, what would it cost? He goes, $50. Yeah. He goes, if you want a second instrument, $25. Okay.
The deal on the second.
Suddenly my music started sounding a lot better. And I had this resource. I was starting to basically wholesale musicians. And what works for those guys is they can set aside, let's say, a Tuesday afternoon, and may have 5 songs to do. Uh-huh. And they can listen once. They have a system of taking notes, and they're good enough that when they play it down the first time, they're looking at their notes, and they will literally, on the first take, have a winner.
Wow.
It's just great. Mm-hmm. And they just zip it up, bundle up, email it back. So maybe $50, but they can literally be in and out of it in 20 minutes if they're organized. Mm-hmm. So they're making $100, $150 an hour just by being organized. Mm-hmm. And so that's how they do it. It's not a loss for them. They're not being cheap. Right. It's great. Right. And Nashville's competitive enough that there's a lot of players that are really good that they really can't charge too much more unless they have some name brandness to them.
Mm-hmm. And so then what you're doing then is you're introducing these Nashville quality players into local music, right?
Which is what they do every day anyway.
Yeah, and you're doing that here in your studio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. I have a friend, Kate, who called me up and said, hey, I have a song idea and she hasn't had one in a while, so I was excited. Well, come on over. Yeah. And we laid it down. It was pretty neat. Yeah. And I sent it off to Andy, the drummer, and he sent it back, and Kate loved it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. So that's a great example of this collaboration that you were talking about earlier.
And it's much more fun to me to do that with real humans playing real instruments compared to a computer dragging and dropping loops and patterns and stuff like that. I get it that pop music is made that way these days.
Yes.
And if I ever want to make a lot of money at this, I better get hooked onto a pop music project.
Right.
But it's just not fun. Yeah. For me, I love, what did Andy come up with? Oh, that's so awesome. Great.
Yeah. Yeah. I see. So tell me a little bit about how you. I didn't even mention the houses.
Oh, right.
The houses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other day when we were here doing the other interview, you proudly showed me these photos of these beautiful interiors of houses that you and Julie, your wife Julie, were. You were buying the house and then redoing the house and kind of raising up its style considerably, and then reselling the house. It's not flipping. That's the term. I hate that term, by the way, but that's a common real estate term for this activity. But the stuff you're doing is like a really major change for these houses. Yeah. And what I saw in it was your creative skills exhibited in an interior architecture, environmental graphic. I mean, these three-dimensional skills, visual skills that you have.
Thanks for noticing that. And yeah, Julie and I really we wrestle about it too. I may think one thing is cool, she may think another thing is cool, and we almost take turns who's going to decide on this one. You know? But I guess neither she or I are content to just slam something out that's average. So when you talk about house flipping, it usually means you buy a cheap dump and you literally tape off the windows and spray paint it,
exactly.
Put some bark in the yard, and then put the real estate sign out in front. And that's just so wrong to me aesthetically. I mean, I know it sounds cliche, but leaving the world a better place is kind of cool. So, well, back to the pottery studio, we have this saying that I'd like us to say more is, we're there to deliver delight. We, from the time the customer comes in, we want that experience that they have to be better than what they were expecting. So they're kind of delighted, and when to the time their final piece is done, it's better than what they thought, which it will be, because they always look cool coming out of the kiln. So same thing with the houses. You know, I want people to like it, and that comes down to little architecture types of decisions, like, well, how much space should we put between that wall and this closet, and how does this function in this kitchen, you know, and stuff like that. But part of it is, I think a creative person working on creative projects can do pretty well over time if they squirrel away money, but that's really hard to do, especially for creatives who also have a fancy for fun things.
Yeah.
So
we like to spend money.
Exactly. On cool stuff.
And it's easy to spend money.
Very.
It's harder to get it. It's easy to spend.
Yeah. So I'm not saying this is just for everybody, but for me, I knew that if I'm ever going to retire someday or be able to live off of income that's just coming, I'm not working for any big company, so I'm not going to have some pension. I'm not working for the government like my dad did, so there's not some great pension. I have to create my own pension. So I bought a fourplex at one time and struggled with renters and all of that stuff for a number of years, and Julie had done the same thing. And so as enough years go by, you actually own part of that. The bank owns less of it. So we're able to sell some of that, buy this other thing, fix it up, sell that. You can just make so much more money in big chunks doing that than clicking your mouse making cool stuff. So I'm not giving up clicking my mouse making cool stuff, but it's almost like it was a need. We had to figure out, how do we get above the clouds money-wise.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a really, really important point, because that's the whole point of this, is how do we make our way given the realities of the environment that we're in.
Yeah.
So, but I think the good part of this is that you get, and I'm sure Julie does as well, you get tremendous personal pleasure and pride from creating a house that's beautiful, that was interesting for you to create, that you enjoyed the process of creating the house yourself.
Yeah, it is fun.
Not to mention that you taught yourself to be an electrician.
Right.
I think you better tell that story too. Because most people wouldn't think of this as being creative, but I happen to think of it as extremely creative. So you go ahead.
Well, okay. Well, it was certainly a way to solve a problem, because plumbers and electricians can charge a lot because they have to have a certification. It takes a long time for them to get to the point of that certification. It's just as hard as going to college and getting a master's degree in terms of time of your life. So that's awesome. And you cannot, but if you own the property, you're allowed by law to work on the plumbing and work on the electrical. You still have to have it inspected by the state inspectors, just like a licensed electrician would. So in that sense, because it has to get inspected, and those inspectors are usually, they look very closely at a homeowner done job because they figure it's going to be wrong. There's that safety buffer there that I can do it myself, and I've got the backstop of the inspection. So as we were doing these houses, by the second one, we realized how much we were paying the electrical company. It was just insane for how much time they were there. I thought, well, I can learn that one. That can be my contribution to to helping this be more profitable.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent, I'd like to say 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours studying, but it wasn't that much. It was more like maybe dozens, maybe a dozen. There are YouTube channels that are specifically targeted at apprentices. So I devoured those. I found my favorites that were easy to learn from. Bought all the tools that you need, and so rewired 2 houses now.
I think that's really cool, because that's actually the kind of thing that I could see myself doing. Is just because we thought we were going to adopt a couple of big dogs a while back, and Robin says, well, how are we going to keep them? I said, oh, I'll build a fence.
Okay.
So, I went online and tried and figured out what the best good-looking fence I could build, the easiest good-looking fence that I could build, and bought the materials, had them delivered, and built a fence,
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's a lot easier than learning to do wiring on YouTube, but I have that tendency myself, and I think it is kind of innate in me that I like digging in and learning how to do something myself, and then physically doing it myself. I enjoy immensely.
Yeah, cool. I'm 3 for 3 on passing inspections on the first time, which is kind of cool. And I have some tips for anybody who wants to try this. When the inspector came, I wore my Carhartt. I had my proper leather belt with the bag on the side with all the right electrical tools. And fortunately, since I'd done the work, this stuff was starting to look a little worn out.
Yes.
So I had a legitimate look.
Yes.
And so he comes in the driveway. Here I am looking like I belong there. And he gets out and he goes, I sure as hell hope you know what you're doing, because I had to drive a long way to get here. Not in a good mood. I said, well, this is my first time, so I'm sure I'll find out if it's okay. And he goes, yeah. And I said, should we start at the panel? And he said, that'd be good. And I wanted the panel first because I'd done a killer job on neatness there. So went there first, and then he poked around a little bit, and within about 30 seconds, he goes, oh, well, okay, it looks like you know what you're doing. Oh, yeah, this is right. Now, why'd you do this? And I go, well, because I had to blah, blah, blah. And he goes, okay, yeah, that's good. I said, can I show you a 3-way switch? Because I've got a question about that. And he goes, sure. So we go upstairs, and I pass him to this section that's got 4 light switches and all these wires going up the wall beautifully, neatly, and spanning out. It looked totally dialed. And he goes, yeah, okay, that's good. And then I pointed his attention to the 3-way switch question, blah, blah, blah. And before you know it, he was giving me tips on how I can save time, make things a little easier. So it totally shifted the game because I showed him the good stuff first. Yeah. I thought that was kind of funny leaving, because I'm not saying I cheated. I knew what I was doing, but there's a lot I don't know. Sure. But I also know how to look it up. I know how to know what I don't know and look it up.
So you're a good storyteller.
Yeah.
You relate to people, and you had a sense of who he was before he arrived, and you had a sense of how he would view an owner who did it himself.
I wonder if that comes from the design stuff where you're creating a creative brief in the first place.
Perhaps it does.
Who is our audience? What do they care about?
Right. And so you made it about him, not about you. And in the design world, you have to do that all the time. You've got to understand the client and what they're trying to do, and be focused on them and their need, not your own deal.
That's so key. And the more I can practice it, the better things go in the design world. And it's so unintuitive. For most of my years, I would create a thing, show it to the client, and I'm wishing for the applause.
Yeah.
And then I don't get the applause, and I'm wondering why. It's only been in the last few years I've been able to grow up enough to actually put myself on their side and to forget about whether my stuff is cool. I try to make it cool, but what do they care about? What pressures are they under?
Right.
I actually try to think about that.
Yeah.
Oh, they've got their boss who needs it done by such and such date. So when I'm talking to them, I'm talking about, when do we need this done by? How are we going to get that done? I'm not on their side. Putting them first.
Yeah, and that
really
and
helps.
so as a creative making our way in the world, we have to understand that it's not just about what we do and what personal pleasure we get from doing it, but also how does it meet someone else's need. And if it doesn't, forget it. There's going to be no sale. And so when it came to the inspector, you basically intuitively probably, you knew exactly what you needed to wear. You knew that your toolkit was worn and that it would measure up to looking like you were a working guy and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you were not a some
It was
kind
intuitive.
Of, yeah,
I
you
haven't
were
thought
not
it through that much.
Well, you might not have thought through it, but it was intuitive, and you kind of knew where he was coming from and where you were coming from and how he might view you. I think that's critically important. And my guess is that when you're making music with a group, helping them make their music with your contributions, that you're doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it really is. Music especially is a service industry where unless you're the extreme artist who's creating their thing that everybody loves, you're serving that cause, that purpose. I mean, when songwriters write songs, why are they writing them?
Mm-hmm.
Most of us, especially us older ones, we know that we are not going to get fame.
Right.
We're not young and attractive, but we have some seasoned life under our belts, and so we can maybe have an idea that's insightful. Mm-hmm. But the point of making a song is that hopefully it will get done by somebody else, or maybe we make a recording and it gets inserted in the background in a movie or something like that. That's where the money comes. And so when I'm helping somebody make a song, I am serving them by finishing the song. I could be tiling a bathroom. It's not much different other than that there's guitars involved. Right.
And so through all of these things, you've made money in every one of these, some of them more than others, obviously, but the, elementary school, graphic designer, writer, retailer, musician, recording engineer, storyteller, explainer, environmental graphics, electrician, learned from YouTube, etc., and houses, which I didn't put down. Every one of these things has contributed to your income and made it possible for you and Julie to have a life together.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, that's the whole point of my thinking about creatives and this new world that we're in, is that one way to do it is not to think of yourself as a graphic designer or as just a musician or as any one of these things on this list. Think of yourself as a creative person, and you're using your talents and skills to make your way in the world through all of these different things. I have one more question for you.
Okay.
This didn't come up during our pre-interview. I don't think it did. It might have. When did you know, when you were little growing up, when did you know that you were creative, that you were interested perhaps in visual things, or interested perhaps in telling the story, or interested perhaps in making the music, or any of the other? When do you think you kind of discovered that in your? Did you have a moment when something happened? You got some praise from somebody. You said to me in the 4th grade, did somebody notice that you could draw and applaud you for it?
Well, I don't know that there was any one time, and I still don't know.
Okay, cool, fair enough.
But I think, you just said it. You gave a long list, so right now I am feeling like, okay, I guess I am a creative. Honestly, a lot of times I don't think so. I'm that great. Here's my dad. It was more of math and engineering, and very organized, and I don't know that he's ever been able to get what I'm doing. Yeah. And so back when I had a job with the school district, that made a lot more sense to him. Sure. And he just thought I was crazy to quit that, to step out of the security.
Of course, yeah.
So part of it is from where I've come from, the more regimented world. My relatives were lawyers and engineers. Mm-hmm. So nobody did this crazy stuff that I'm doing. It's crazy to them. To you and me, this is like the way to breathe.
This is life, yeah.
It's life, and I found it's a safer life. Because I've been fired a few times working for companies, and then what do you got? Nothing. Oh, jeez, I'm on the phone seeing like, hey, remember I did that brochure for you? Yeah. What do you think? But if you can have several pots on the stove, each one of them a different project, then if one of them burns or that burner goes out, you've got the others to go. So if you're creative, you don't want to ever have just one client.
Did you get good grades in elementary school? Were you a studious student?
I would say I was always toward the top,
Mm-hmm.
not the top, but
Mm-hmm.
back in my era, they would divide you into reading groups. Basically, could you
right.
read well,
Yeah.
medium, or not?
Yeah.
Now I know that has in the younger years that has a lot to do with just brain development.
Sure.
But anyway, I was usually in the top reading group,
Mm-hmm.
and there were always a couple of kids that I was always right in second place behind them. So I was a B plus kind of guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, bright, but not
Bright,
the,
but-
not the top achiever, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not that I didn't get what they were doing. It's just I didn't have the tenacity for it. There were other things I had tenacity for.
You didn't care all that
I
much.
didn't care all that much.
Yeah.
I got into motocross racing when I was in junior high and high school, and that was my total thing.
Yeah.
And I got pretty good. Almost went pro in that.
Whoa, whoa.
So I still follow that sport. I love
Motocross
it.
racing on a bicycle or
No, it's a motorcycle.
A
and
motorcycle.
It's, up and down hills. It's a
Oh,
closed
okay.
circuit track,
uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
yeah, so it's super fun.
Yeah.
I still have a bike.
Sounds like a teenage dream.
It was a teenage dream.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was better than anybody in my school at that.
Mm-hmm.
It was more of a regional
Mhm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be like kids who are nowadays in club volleyball, and if they were on the winning team or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think there was a time when I realized I was worried like this will be my last good idea. I think whatever I was working on, like, man, I hope I can pull that off again. But what I kept finding is that, yeah, I could.
Yeah.
Because the next project was a different set of variables, different client, different needs, different message, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, I'd come up with something. And it came to the point where, like, I don't even worry about it. I know I will be able to come up with something.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's experience, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing like experience. I mean, it's a huge advantage. Because when you don't have any experience, then you really struggle with these things. Like, will I never come up with another idea again?
Right.
And after you've done it a few times, you realize that's really not the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thought I have is, if we're alive, we all have childhoods. So,
Mhm.
and it's the making of us in one way or another. And sometimes we're opposites.
Mhm.
And because, somehow the status quo of the way we grew up didn't fit us one way or another. And we're like, okay, I can do this a little bit, but,
Yeah. By childhoods, you mean as far as your own confidence and things like that?
well, where you grow up, your family and all of this, you said everybody else in your family's more linear. They're lawyers and they work for corporations, or they do things that are more linear or more status quo,
yeah,
perhaps.
respected amongst the normal community.
Right,
Nobody was working in an ad agency. Didn't even know what one of those was.
right.
Well, okay, so when I was in elementary school age myself, my dad got married to the Wicked Witch of the West. She was horrible. I mean, she was mean.
Yeah.
And it was pretty abusive.
Boy, that's classic.
Yeah. So the good part about that is that I learned how to agree with people, because if you didn't agree in the home, it would have been who knows what it would have been.
How old were you then when that happened?
7 to 12.
Oh, God.
Yeah, 6 to 12.
Yeah.
So I know that generated in me a habit of being kind of people pleasing
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a little bit happy friendly. But I don't really want to shed the happy friendly. I like that. But I definitely have a respect for people that are more powerful than me. And some bitterness. But you work that out.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much that plays into the determination to figure thing out or get it done or else what. I don't know what else.
Maybe you just wanted to get the hell out of there.
Yeah. And then teenage years were awesome because it was just me and my dad.
Uh-huh.
And I had a lot of freedom.
Uh-huh. And you had this motorbike thing.
Yeah, the motorcycle thing.
And he was okay with that.
He supported it.
Cool.
It was fantastic.
Yeah. Cool.
And along with motorsports comes a lot of graphics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Right.
think I definitely had
That's
a sense
right.
for what I thought was cool and not cool.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that was called typography
Yes.
until way later.
Sure.
what really clicked for me is I was in my late 20s. I went and visited a friend who worked at an ad agency, just say hi, and we were going to go out to lunch. And he was showing me, he was doing some work on the Macintosh. It had just come out.
Oh.
And he was kerning type.
Oh.
And it's like, I thought, I could totally do that. This is the difference between dorky and cool. It's how you park the letters. And I didn't even know that was a thing, but I'd been resonating with it all the years
along.
before that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So if there was an aha moment, that was it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
And that's really when I started going and finding projects where I could try that.
Yeah. Yeah.
All does freehand.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else you can think of that that would be good for people that so we're trying to provide, what we're trying to do is just tell an example of how someone has managed this through all these different skills and so on.
I think it really helped that I had 3 young children at the time that I made that pivot away from teaching.
Yeah.
I didn't have the option of just floating around dreaming.
Right.
I actually had to generate cash.
Sure.
Which means pricing the job.
Yeah.
It means having a job, finding a project.
Right.
And then doing it in a way that where you're going forward and you don't have to go backwards. And by that I mean let's say you spend a lot of time creating a website and you just love it, but it turns out that it's way different than what your client wishes. And you show it to them and they go, whoa, this isn't at all what we talked about. And now you have this tension in the relationship. Chances are you never got any money up front and they're not about to pay for this wacky thing that you just made. So you have to learn stuff like that pretty quickly, how to make sure that what you don't go too far down a rabbit hole without the client agreeing with you that you should be going down that rabbit hole. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and also the other point you're making is that you had to make money at this. So it wasn't all just fun and games. You had to have a stable income because you had 3 babies and responsibilities.
Yeah.
And so so you had real discipline, and that's clearly throughout all of these things that you've done, you've had real discipline. And in fact, you mentioned it over and over again with different steps of this, how you're concerned about how the client feels, how the other person feels, how the other person will respond. And you get your creative kicks in the process and good feelings about doing the work, but you're also knowing that you're doing it for another person. It's not just you creating something completely on your own. So,
True.
And so real discipline, you've mentioned it throughout of these, and especially with the house thing, you're seeing we need to make enough money so that we can retire when we're not physically able to do this anymore. So
don't take this to mean that I am disciplined. I get distracted really easily, so I often have to put blinders on myself, like the old horse and buggy, to make sure I'm looking straight down the road, and set alarms on my phone so I don't forget whatever. I lean on a lot of different crutches to make sure that I don't sail off
so
the cliff.
you have developed methods to manage your own attention deficit issues that just come with the program that you're built with.
Right.
And I also suffer from attention deficit syndrome, and I have found that if I do not make a list, I won't be able to do anything. I literally know I have to do this, and I have to do that, and I have to do the other thing. If I do not make a list of those things, they won't happen.
Great. So we fake like we're disciplined, and suddenly we are disciplined.
Well, we develop techniques for managing the parts of our personality that can be harmful to us.
Yeah.
That's really what we're doing.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so we're able to do all these different things. And we recognize that we have some things that we struggle with, so we develop methods to protect ourselves from the parts of the kit that we were born with to get by.
Well put.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. If more and more people are going to be freelancing in the coming years, I think there's going to be a lot of need for basic coaching on here's how you make that thing work.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And following through is one thing. Writing down what you want is another thing.
Yep.
When I say what you want, I mean what kind of work do you want to do? Who do you want to do it for? And for some reason, when you write it down, and I should do this more, it tends to start to happen.
Yes, there is a hand-eye mind circuit that we have, that when we make a list of things, it helps us align ourselves around the list. It can also be a confidence builder. I've told that story a million times, where I would go to the men's room, sit down when I was super nervous, and write down my things I felt particularly good about that I had accomplished, and it would then give me the courage to actually go deal with something that seemed difficult at the time.
Yeah.
So, these are all, so we learn ways, and we can be taught ways by others. We learn ways to deal with these things that we struggle with, so that we can actually be self-sufficient to enough of a degree that we can get by in the world.
Yeah.
And do more than get by. I mean, you're doing really, really well. You're doing fabulously.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Hey, was this fun or what?
Really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Unexpected.
I thought it would be. Let's do some more of this.
Okay.
All right.
We could have little round tables on various problems creatives have. And,
absolutely. Yeah.
And how we enjoy those problems.
Exactly. We'll do it. All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching, if you did.